to take any more time of your precious schedule. We are fully aware that we are what's left in the day, and it's what's dividing you between this panel and dinner. So we hope to have an informal conversation with all of you. Actually, we all hope to get out of the audience as much as we hope to share with you on innovative, creative ways to bridge the gap between the growing demand for talent, for cybersecurity talents and skills, and the supply of those professionals and capacity. So as we have heard all day, I was trying to also wrap some conclusion from the day. We have heard several panel and roundtable and different discussion that we are all living through this huge shortage of skills and talent worldwide, and this affects our collective cybersecurity. The shortage can be felt across all sectors of the economy, from national governments to Fortune 500 companies, academia, NGOs, and international governmental organizations. However, obviously the growing gap between, again, that demand for skills and talent and the supply of professionals disproportionately impacts developing countries, and especially those cyber poor environments that lack the expertise and resources. So in this specific discussion, we wanted to take advantage of the incredible expertise and talent and different perspective that our panelists bring to discuss some of the more creative, innovative way to close that gap and to address the need for talent and expertise and resources in those cyber poor environments. So I will skip my own remarks so we can hear from them. But what I hope, again, that you also bring to the discussion maybe are other initiatives that we are not aware of that should be further expanded, strengthened, and inspire that collaboration. So instead of replicating effort, we're building on each other. So to do all of that, we have a distinguished panel of experts. So I'll go from my left and continue. We have Laura Tomasi, the head of cyber partnership and communication at Standard Chapter. Next to Laura is Derek Asamoah. He is the senior IT infrastructure engineer at Agmal. Then my lovely Francesca Bosco. We share name and often emails that are meant for each other. She's the chief strategist and partnership officers at the CyberPeace Institute in Geneva. To her left is my other dear friend, Maurice Kent. He's the program coordinator of Digital Apex at USAID. And to his left, my other friend, Celia Madliosip, the policy officer at EU CyberNet, although you also hold another position in Estonia, right, with the national agency? Just want to make sure that I get all that right. So the CyberPeace Institute really inspired this panel. We were all very impressed with the proposal. Also, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Francesca. I'm one of the program advisor for the GC3B, and very glad to be here, and thank you for sticking with us at the end of the day. So, Francesca, if I may start with you, can you tell us more about how the CyberPeace Institute, in particular, is introducing innovative approaches and partnerships on the ground that are helping to close that cybersecurity skills gap in those cyber poor environments, and specifically provide talent and expertise to some of the organizations that need it the most and have the most limited resources, such as humanitarian NGOs and other civil society organizations? Thank you.
Let me start in an awkward way, thanking the moderator, meaning that you played a fundamental role in putting this panel together, and I'm really thankful for all the, I can say, friends that are here. And I like the way that you frame it, and it's interesting because for preparing the panel, I work in close collaboration with the actual team that is deploying the program that I will tell you about specifically. And it was interesting because discussing with our head of the program, it was like NGOs, so the ones that you mentioned, like for example, humanitarian development organizations are often considered target-rich and cyber-poor organizations for a different set of factors. And I mean, maybe I can give you a little bit of like sharing some of the insights that we see in working with the different NGOs, and then maybe I can give you an example of what we are basically building with the community, also many of the people here, in terms of innovative ways to tackle the cyber poor environment and how to support, again, not to put ad hoc patch, but to develop long-term solutions. What we've seen is that, indeed, what we've heard also this morning and repeatedly throughout the different panels, so the increasing dependence on technology, specifically, for example, for organizations that are, the closest one to people in need, in peace, wartime, as we see in this moment, but also that are close to us. With many civil society organizations, maybe we don't realize it, but they are the ones that are the closest one to society and to also deliver basic services. The general lack of cybersecurity preparedness, which is not necessarily a negative connotation, the idea is often because they have, let's say, other priorities in their mission. And a practical example is in our program, we work with many organizations that are dealing with violence against women, for example, kids education, providing shelters, for example, in the case of like domestic violence and so on. It's sad to say, but cybersecurity is not their priority. But when a cyber attack hits, the problem is not just about data infrastructure, it's about also the beneficiaries that they serve, because they run the risk of being secondary victims. It's about the ecosystem of partners and donors that they have, because it might impact, for example, their reputation and the perception as trusted partners. They're also targeted for money. Many NGOs, they are, let's say, relatively wealthy because they're receiving money from donors. And cyber criminals, they are not really making often, unfortunately, distinction in terms of the target. And so they are fairly high rewarding target with sort of like low risk in a way and low effort. From malicious cyber actors, and also they are often operating in a very risky environment. One of the things that we are often discussing with partners and with the organization that we are assisting is, it's true that there are different initiatives, programs, tools, services, but often they are not conceived with the specific needs in mind. It's very different, the operating environment, depending on, let's be honest, the geography, the digital divide that you might need to face, the type of malicious actors that you might be exposed to, depending on the type of activity that you're carrying out. So all this consider specifically the CyberPeace Institute. We are an independent and neutral organization. We are an NGO based in Geneva, but the mandate is global. And when the Institute was created, the idea was really like, let's frame cybersecurity and cyberpeace in a different way. What we think is, it's much more about ensuring rights to people, to security, dignity, and equity. Because thanks to cyber, you can basically benefit the most, let's say, of technology and of progress that technology can bring. For doing this, one of the first things that we were confronted with was like how we can help these cyber poor organizations or environment in enhancing the baseline, basically, in boosting their capabilities at scale. So we studied, let's say, we analyzed the different models, the different initiatives. One of our flagship initiatives, and this is also, and thanks also to the support that we have from some of our partners here, is it's called the CyberPeace Builders Program. So the CyberPeace Builders Program is a program that matches the cyber-skilled volunteers coming from the private sector that are matched basically with humanitarian development organizations in need with the goal of building cybersecurity capabilities. So the program offers free cybersecurity support for the NGOs that are participating. And as today, I was checking and I have the platform open, we are assisting 197 NGOs across the world with 636 volunteers coming from 45 different companies. I want to say something that regarding to your question about talent, why we think it's relevant for this session specifically, it's because, so the first aim of the program was like support civil society organization. Support civil society organization in a sort of what I was saying before, for long-term cyber resilience. So not to just support because they've been attacked, they need to recover, they have an immediate issue, but most of the support that we are requested is like, how can I build my cybersecurity infrastructure? Or how can I get, let's say, cybersecurity awareness training for all my staff, because they have no clue. Which are the roles that we might need to think about in the organization, because we haven't thought about it. So it's much more about creating this sort of like long-term sustainability, not also to create a dependency on the program. And we had the two side effects, and I will stop here and maybe sharing some more insights after. One side effect was, as mentioned, creating also, let's say, a new cybersecurity market. I started many, many years ago. I always call myself a recovering lawyer because unfortunately I studied law, but then I started immediately with cybersecurity. And it was difficult to fit, I'm honest. It was difficult to fit because there was always like a sort of like weird animal in this system, especially many years ago when I started. And also the areas of work were kind of like, okay, international organization, government, private sector. No, civil society organization is an amazing field to work in, but nobody is linking cybersecurity with civil society organization, for example. So that's one part. So creating a sort of like job market, creating an appetite, creating the needs to be understood also within that sector. And on the other hand, side effect is that, and maybe I will also leave the floor to Laura representing the private sector here, but it was like, most of the volunteering initiatives that you get in many companies, even big ones, are, I would say, more traditional ones. So like building schools, like a voluntary service at kindergarten, these kind of things, which is great and amazing, but it's not related to your specific skills. So what we is an incredible engagement of cyber-skilled people, because finally they can help with the gift, let's say, that they have. And also, one part of the program is also a training program, not only for NGOs, but also for the corporate volunteers, for example, on basic things like a human rights-based approach or humanitarian awareness. And this is found extremely valuable by the volunteers because they are learning something new, and they're often exposed to, let's say, new challenges compared to the more, let's say, repetitive tasks that they might often need to deal with. So, yeah, I stop here. I can share something later, but yeah, just to give you a glimpse.
Thank you. And Francesca is also here for the next day and a half, so I encourage you all to approach her if you want to learn more about the CyberPeace Builders initiative. But anyway, thank you for reminding us, one, of the need to defend, protect, support some of the most vulnerable communities within society, which is civil society, which is NGOs, and also for coming up with this concept of skills-based volunteerism, which honestly I wasn't familiar with until I learned more about CyberPeace Builders. But before I go to Laura, I actually wanted to bring Maurice, because a lot of the work that USAID does in the United States and around the world, actually around the world, it's supporting a lot of those cyber poor partners in high threat environment. So one of the many programs on cyber capacity building that USAID supports is the Digital Apex, as I was saying, that you manage. So can you tell us more about this specific program and how through the Digital Apex you're able to support some of those more vulnerable communities with some of the resources, their capacity that they need most? Thank
you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and yeah, happy to do so. So laying out the kind of history and background of Digital Apex, which is about 4 years old now, and big shout out to Chuck and George, who are from Vistant, which is the main implementer of the project, and then Hafsa, who is one of our, from Cambridge Global Associates advisors, who is one of our great subcontractors as well. If you have more questions, please ask them. But about 4 years ago, there was a push to address, or at least start to address, what is a kind of systemic gap in our programming. So USAID funds thousands of organizations globally. Those organizations can be large companies, they can be small companies, they can be big NGOs, small NGOs, they can be activist groups, they can be journalists, they can be small farmers collectives, they can be hospitals. And then each of those organizations that we fund then works with, you know, hundreds of beneficiary individuals or other organizations. And none of those funding mechanisms that we're creating, and none of those partners necessarily, some of them might be, but many of them, most of them, are not necessarily thinking about the kind of digital resilience, cybersecurity of their project, and we're not telling them to do that. We're not necessarily funding them to do that either. It's not called out in the funding mechanisms. And so 4 years ago, there was the idea to create a mechanism that would allow us to at least identify those partners in contexts where they were most likely to suffer a cyber attack and help them out, either to the left of boom, so pre-attack, or to the right of boom after they've suffered a cyber attack or ransomware or something like that, figuring out with them how to recover. And so we set up Digital Apex, which is a contractual mechanism that uses small businesses partnered with local companies and local cyber experts to deliver training, assessments, hardware, software, licenses, pretty much anything you can come up with in terms of cyber support to USAID partners. And partner is a broad term. It can be somebody that we fund directly, but then also an organization that we work with indirectly. And so the kind of key precepts of what the program delivers is really focused around meeting organizations where they are. These organizations in many cases are, they're not just in a cyber poor environment, they are cyber poor themselves, or even if the environment is cyber rich, they are not a cyber rich organization. And in many cases, especially for organizations that are in a weird space where they're not nonprofit, but they're not really for-profit, media in particular, they can't access a lot of resources that nonprofits can. And so there's a lot of need there. And so we try to build trust by working through and in partnership with existing programs. So if we're funding 20 partners through a big agriculture program, we'll work in touch with the main funder for that to deliver cybersecurity assistance, bring in local partners, and build that kind of camaraderie, so it's not just, hello, I'm a cybersecurity expert, and I'm here to deliver assistance to you. And then once we've had those kind of continual iterative engagements with those partners, we get a better understanding of what they actually need. Is it something simple like a password manager? Is it something more intensive like redesigning their software architecture to be more secure? Is it a lot more training? Is it incident response? Is it hardware and software and secure communications? There's so many different things we can do, and really each organization will have its own needs. And so trying to understand what that is and then meet those things is really crucial. And then, I think the key part is then really just having that sustained engagement to where it's not just, we showed up, we talked to you once, we did an assessment, here's your list of things you have to fix, but then providing this, similar engagement and almost a help desk in many cases over the next, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, so that as organizations encounter difficulties, they can come back to us and get the solutions they need. And then, in terms of results that we found, because we're doing, the training is not just training organizations, it's doing training of trainers, trying to equip partners, individuals within all of those organizations so that they can do sort of the bare minimum and growing cybersecurity support for their organizations. And we've seen that in multiple cases where people have gone through the training and we come back and they're like, okay, I'm working on this. Oh, I saw a problem now, I know what to look for. And if I can't fix it, or at least think about how I might fix it, I can call you and get more information. And so that kind of virtuous cycle builds out positive longer-term results for the organizations. We can get to sustainability later, but yeah.
Great,
Thanks.
Thank you. And I do encourage both our speakers and our members of the audience, as you hear about these innovative approaches, to think about how to scale and increase and use the ideas that already exist in different contexts. So thank you, Maurice, for that. So now, Laura, if I can go back to you as the member of the private sector represented here on the panel. Can you tell us more about how Standard Chapter particularly implement these innovative programs to address the local talent gap, but especially the concept of using volunteers to help build the cyber capacity locally and address the needs that you see. Here, I'll share the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to talk about two programs. So the first one I'll talk about is a diversity and inclusion program. So we've had a Women in Cyber Mentorship program that we've been running in East Africa that targets, whose initial intention was to target women that are keen on careers in cybersecurity and do not understand what are the options available. So if I were to share statistics, globally, we have a shortage of cybersecurity skills. I think about 4 million from a skills gap globally. Yet in Africa and Middle East, when you look at the women in cybersecurity field, it accounts for less than 10% of all professionals in cybersecurity in those two regions. Now, globally, I think women account for 24%, but you can see the big gap in the continent of Africa and in Middle East. So that is why we came up with the Women in Cyber Mentorship Program, where we got mentees from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. The program was actually run through the Kenya office where I sit, so I was coordinating the program in partnership with academia. I think throughout this program we've been talking about partnerships, so with academia, who are running the program administratively. Out of the 100 women mentees, we had 79 of them graduating, completing the program, and most importantly, understanding that a career in cybersecurity is not just about hacking. You can be an educator, understanding the continent context that a lot of what's driving financial inclusion in Africa is actually through digital channels. So if you can get people to be confident about it, understand that I can be a trainer to vulnerable people, to the elderly around this, then I can actually uplift the entire country or region, then that becomes a positive thing. So a number of them have gone out to get roles in different organizations, not necessarily typical hacking, which they initially thought is what it's all about. We had legal professionals coming in and understanding that, looks like if I understand cybersecurity, then I can also be able to take on another path here and there. We have educators and even early educators getting into it, just because of that understanding that cybersecurity is broad and the cake is big. And there's no scarcity mentality here. There's a cake sufficient for all of us. Now, then the second one, which is the exciting one that I want to talk about, is what we're doing with the CyberPeace Institute, the CyberPeace Builders. So it's something that we've recently signed up, but it's been a long conversation with Standard Chartered Bank. If I can just talk about the scope of what I look after all 51 markets. So when I'm talking about Standard Chartered here, I'm talking about the entire group of 51 countries. Number of cyber professionals we have are about 5,000 thereabout. That includes the people who do the red team, blue team testing, cyber defense center, risk professionals, audit professionals. And one of the core things that as an organization we focus on is volunteering. Now, traditionally, the volunteering that people have done has been great. It's been on planting trees, visiting children's homes, supporting a community. But guess what? We all know that cyber professionals do it because they are passionate about it. And what better way than to get a person to volunteer in something they're passionate about? So when we had the conversation with CyberPeace Institute on the volunteering opportunities available, we ended up being overwhelmed because we had more people volunteering to support than the number of organizations that immediately needed the support at that point in time. Appreciate that the NGOs are many and they need support, but at no time will somebody say that I need 5,000 professionals at the same time. So we have many people willing to volunteer, and those volunteer hours are going to count towards the 3 days a year that staff are given to volunteer towards a cause that matters. And I think that's a positive thing, because for me, that is actually a noble thing. If you can go out of your way and utilize your skill to help an individual in need. The humanitarian problem is a real problem, where somebody is funding a program and really trying their best to assist, help families in war-torn countries to connect with each other. And there you have the threat actors trying to access the data, publish it. The security risk that these individuals that are in vulnerable positions are exposed to is quite high. You have no idea. Some of the people that are being targeted are even targeted for political reasons. So if that information is leaked out, the impact becomes very big. And that's the reason why then we understand and appreciate that you can actually be human and contribute towards a humanitarian cause while going about your day-to-day work in the things that you're passionate about. So I think I can say that about the program. It's something we are looking forward to speaking about in a big way, especially at the start of next year. but it's something that has been appreciated, and it really resonates with that agenda around having an impact to the society around you. Yeah, thank you.
Very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that story. And along the same line, we also, Derek, you represent an NGO here that does a lot of work to combat malaria. But perhaps you could actually share with us in this audience what are the specific challenges and also opportunities that are associated with developing cyber capacity building. So if you could share some of those challenges and how, in the specific case of Agmal, you have been overcoming and working with some of the partners here on stage to build capacity. Thank you.
Yes. So some of the challenges we do face is the way we work, we focus in rural areas, that's small towns and villages in Ghana. And the problem here is because we employ people as well from those areas, they are very low in terms of having cyber knowledge. And the issue here is trying to train such teams in those areas is a bit difficult. So the challenge here too, again, is because we have low levels of skill sets in our teams, when there are certain trainings or resources you want to share with them, it's quite difficult for them to take in. So you have that sort of like difficulty in getting people to understand what you're trying to get them to go on board with. And another thing too is Agamal is an organization that remotely collects data and monitors malaria cases as well. And trying to keep that data safe is an issue because we have teams down the borders of Ghana, and trying to make sure that that data comes to the headquarters without any interruption is at times a challenge. So trying to make people get involved in cyber capacity is a big issue for us. And we are glad that we've had partnerships with CyberPeace Institute that has made it easy for us to sort of have more volunteers that can train our teams. And the fact that it's for free is what amazes me. Because nowadays, trying to get that cybersecurity knowledge is quite expensive. And we don't have the skill sets. We don't have the teams that are trained, that cybersecurity experts. So having experts from big organizations like Adobe, Microsoft, LinkedIn, to train you for free is an amazing impact. So I believe that if we continue to get such partnerships and such opportunities, we'll be able to bridge that gap and sort of improve the way our current situation in the cyber capacity is. So that's what I believe. So finally, I feel the opportunity we need here is we are in the rural communities. These people don't have access to even the internet. And if we can build good partnerships, you are going directly to the root cause of the problem. So that's what I believe we can achieve with CyberPeace and other organizations.
Can I actually a very quick follow-up to that?
Yes.
How did you find out about these resources? Because often a lot of the communities and organizations, they did most just don't know who to turn to. When you're not a national government, when you're not a CERT, when you're not a critical infrastructure. So in your case, how did you find out about these opportunities, whether it was free training or partnership with other organizations?
Yes. So one thing about me is when any opportunity comes my way, I make sure that I dig deeper. I go
So they came to you?
Yeah, it came to me. I was there and I was like, oh, there's this opportunity to partner with CyberPeace. And I was like, okay, let's get to know more. A lot of people would just disregard it, but I took it in and said, no, I need to get to know more about CyberPeace and how we can build and transform our organization with them.
Thank you. I think this highlights the importance of having a network and being part of a network.
Yes.
And when you talk about your challenges, there might be somebody else within that network that might be able to point you to the right organization or government or donor or implementer that might be able to help. So this is also what we're trying to do through this conference, is to continue to build and strengthen this network, maybe not just with the usual partners and the usual suspects, again, large donors and implementers, but also organizations that can share their own experience.
And I wanted to add one more thing. And I'll say the CyberPeace impact has been great because it has transformed our organization. Before last year, if you said anything about phishing, people felt like, what are you talking about? Like, Do you mean fishing, trying to catch a fish or something? But now some terminologies has become a bit common in our organization, which is amazing. And there are a lot of new ideas that are being encouraged because we were actually scared about using modern tools and modern software. Because somebody will tell you that, oh, this software is asking me for a multi-factor password rules and complexity. No, I don't want to use it. But having such volunteers come in, teach us about MFA, password rules, how to keep your password, has made people a bit more aware and yes, create that engage. So
and usually
great.
when you make it personal, then people bring those best practices home and they can also help their families and their communities and others that don't have that knowledge.
Exactly.
I hope your inbox and the CyberPeace Institute inbox is ready for all the amounts of email requests you're going to be receiving because the session is being recorded.
Exactly. So I would like to encourage those out there, partner with us because we are directly in the rural areas. We are speaking to people, kids, educating them about malaria, and I feel that we can build cyber capacity through that. Why don't we just talk about malaria and talk about IT in the process as well? So I feel by collaborating with us, partnering with us, there'll be a bigger impact than just the usual impact we are trying to make. Yep.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Celia, if I may actually move to a cyber-rich environment, but to ask you how through the EU CyberNet you're able to build on the EU cyber expertise and experience and leverage, engage those cyber experts to actually provide voluntary contribution to non-European countries and locations that, again, don't necessarily have the resources or knowledge or expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Following up on what you said in the beginning about EU CyberNet, and I imagine that many people in the audience might not know what EU CyberNet is, then I will give a little bit of an introduction into what sort of animal we are. So indeed, I am actually based myself at the Estonian National Cybersecurity Center, but I am full-time implementing the EU CyberNet initiative that is fully funded by the European Union. So even though I work out of Tallinn in Estonia, we, with our team, actually work for the EU. EU CyberNet was launched back in 2019, so we've been active for over 4 years now. And I think I can say that EU CyberNet was an innovative approach from the EU's end, because if you generally think about what sort of projects and initiatives EU funds, it's just implementing a certain activity in a certain country, whereas EU CyberNet has sort of two main pillars. On the one hand, we are indeed an implementer. We have a global mandate, and we are a service provider for the European Commission, so we can receive requests either from directly from the EU different institutions, also the EU delegations, but also from countries themselves. So on the one hand, we are a regular implementer. On the other hand, we have been given a mandate to coordinate the work of different EU activities around the world. It's a very important role in the sense that this helps the EU generally to avoid duplication and make sure that all the activities that we do are coherent. So on that regard, I think it's an innovation from the EU side. But why I am really here and why it fits to the dialogue here is that another innovative approach, I would say, is that EU CyberNet also is mandated to create this community of experts. So since 2019, we have been building a community of experts within the EU, but also beyond. We have over 350 people in the pool right now. And these are the people who we actually work with on a daily basis, who we send for the missions. And I have to say that it's not just us. We have a big pool of partners in the European Union as well, who are all invited to use this resource that we are putting together. These cyber experts come from various backgrounds. So we are talking about techies, we are talking about more strategic background people, more operational, etc. And another innovation I wanted to bring in, and I think this was already mentioned, this skill set based approach in cyber. It's like we are generally used to hear about the NICE framework, and ENISA recently came up with their own framework speaking about like role-based cybersecurity activities, whereas we also have it skill-based. As the different activities we do are short-term, we can't really speak about role-based activities because it's not like a permanent position that somebody applies for. The short-term missions might be from 1 day to a couple of days to maybe a couple of weeks, but it really means that those people are hired to do a specific project, to do a specific activity. And for that, we created in 2020 a skill set framework. The skill set framework, what we have created, consists of 38 different skill sets. And again, they vary from very technical things to like creation of national cyber strategies, etc. If somebody's interested in hearing more about the framework, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. It's, in a sense, open resource. We'd be happy if somebody else used it as well. So it's definitely a resource for everybody. But so we do our activities based on those skill sets. And now what we have done in EU CyberNet is that we have a technical platform, what we sort of call a little cyber job portal. That on the one hand, we have these 350 cyber experts, and on the other hand, we have the different authorities and organizations who do missions. So we are sort of a matchmaker in the middle, who can find the right experts for the right for the right activities done by these organizations. These 350 people aren't on our payroll. These are people who have their daily jobs, but are also willing to bring some adventure maybe to their lives. And you already, Francesca, mentioned a couple of ideas like why people might want to do these missions. And everything you said is really the same for us. New challenges, new perspectives, learning new things.
The ability to help, which I'm sure makes people feel good.
And I hope that for many of the people, indeed, that's also the mission. I can bring out one challenge, and then I hope that maybe you said that you hope that the CyberPeace Institute is ready with the flood of requests. Then honestly, I have to say that we'd be happy if we get a flood of requests as well, because sometimes what we are facing really with is that we have this great resource of 350 people like willing to participate in activities, but we are not seeing the same amount of like activities or requests coming into our way. So if somebody out there would be interested in receiving help from CyberNet with the help of the EU, then we'd be happy to receive the requests or hear about these things. So I'll leave it here and happy to
Thank
hear
you. And
questions.
it's probably just a matter of awareness. Again, the more people become aware of these programs,
Exactly.
and the more they connect through the network,
Absolutely.
and the more requests. So while I wait for any question from the audience, with the last 5-7 minutes left we have, well, again, I don't want any awkward pause, but I'm going to use my moderator privileges to ask, especially Francesca, Maurice, and Celia, are these models, are these approaches sustainable, and how do we scale them? So other governments, other donors, they could support, how do they adopt them, scale them up, sustain, so that they're, over time they can grow?
So I wanted actually to share also some reflections, also hearing the great speakers that we had here and the friends here. So I think, great, Francesca, that you highlighted already asking to Derek, but this is also what you were mentioning, Celia. One of the problems is also the awareness, because not necessarily all the people know about it. One way that we went, about it also, let's say, tackling another dimension, which is also something that Derek was specifically mentioning in terms of like the specificity also of what they're doing in the environment where they are working. The model that we created, for example, is working also via regional advisor. Let's face it. The situation that there is, for example, our regional advisor that is based in Kenya, It's not the same situation of our regional advisor that is based in Geneva, for example. And because of, for example, connectivity issues and so on and so forth that you were mentioning before. So, and having a regional advisors is also helping in like engaging with the community. And I would like to stress this word because, again, I go back to the fact that the idea of the model, and to answer to your question, Francesca, in terms of sustainability, I think one aspect that is very important and also to keep people engaged is that it should not be transactional. It should not be opportunistic. The idea is to create, on one hand, again, long-term cyber resilience, but also create relationship because it's about human. One of the best moments that we had was when we had a very informal gathering of volunteers, for example, in Geneva, and seeing the people coming and meeting also with some of the NGOs. That was amazing. And also to what you were explaining, Laura. I think also there's another component that I can share that we see it's working. So it's free for the NGOs, but for example, in terms of what you were saying, in terms of like, we have a running cost of the program, and it's a huge running cost because, I mean, we create an ad hoc platform, we have our staff working on it, but we make it easy. So one of the points also that we see it's working well is because for both of the NGOs, but also for the corporate side, we try to reduce basically often the difficulty that you have in engaging in volunteering opportunities, but it requires, I mean, quite some work on our end. And this is where, for example, where we are looking for support by the companies or by other donors. And then I just finish on one thing. The regional dimension plus the building community, it's also something that, I mean, we are trying when you mentioned the scaling. For example, now we just closed a partnership with the city of The Hague because it's a, let's say, it's a first example, sort of like more public-private partnership, because they said, well, we have a hub of NGOs, and we want to protect them, but we want to do this at scale and enhance their cybersecurity posture. And so we are now partnering with the City of The Hague and some other organization in basically securing this sort of like NGO locally based ecospace. And this is also something that we see as a potential model that is replicable also in other locations. I finish with one challenge inspired also by what you were mentioning, Maurice. One of the challenges that we're still struggling with, and we welcome support and ideas, is the incident response bit, as you know, meaning that this requires a whole, so for example, the type of support that we are currently being able to give is pre and post incident. It's very difficult to have like sustainable models for incident responses. So, I mean, we're working on it, and also we started working also with some partners in the room, and we are eager to continue discussing this. But it's a challenge. I don't know if
Thank you. And again, while waiting for a question from the audience, Marie, again, how do you make these models sustainable so that others maybe replicate something like digital iPads?
Sure. Yeah, I think my answer would be that it is both sustainable and not sustainable, which, you know, for better or for worse, right? It is sustainable in that, you know, the kind of typical cost for a given mission in a given country or sort of a given project is in the, you know, single-digit hundreds of thousands of dollars for, you know, 6, 12, 18 months of kind of protection for most of that mission's partners, which is, you know, I think a relatively modest investment for a country program to ensure that their millions of dollars of programs going into health systems, going into democracy and governance programs, going into all these things, that we mitigate potential risk to the finance, but most importantly to like human elements and reputation and all those kinds of things. So on that side, it is sustainable, because I don't think it's, you know, from an agency perspective, that much of an investment or that large of an investment. It is still just a drop in the bucket in terms of the number of partners that we work with worldwide and/or beneficiary organizations, you know, let alone the second tier, third tier organizations that we're working with, to be able to protect them. And so to be able to support everyone, that's not sustainable. And so finding out ways to continue to expand the accessibility of services, even if we have to fund them as a donor, as compared to volunteer services. I think that they kind of go hand in hand, while also building systemic solutions of starting to build, more cybersecurity requirements or minimum standards and that sort of thing into our funding is kind of the more longer-term sustainable solution. And then on the managerial side too, I think we have an interesting demand call and response or signaling issue to where our requests come in from our missions. And so our missions have to know that there is a call or a demand for cybersecurity support or think that there is vulnerability within their portfolio. And if they don't have that signal, we can go out and try to tell them that there might be, but we can't work around them because we don't know who their partners are necessarily that easily. And so figuring out how to overcome that from a managerial perspective in future iterations is something that we're working on.
And if I might put a plug in for that, there is the great report that USAID authored, the Cybersecurity Primer, which is all about how to incorporate cybersecurity across all development programming so that people start thinking about cybersecurity and cyber resilience from the beginning of a new development project and throughout the entire life cycle. I think that has been inspirational because I know it's free for everybody to use and utilize, even if it was originally written for USAID, correct?
Yeah, it's available publicly.
So
Thank you for
resource.
the unsolicited plug.
Any question from the audience? Otherwise, yes. Oh,
Yes, if
please.
we can
About
just-
sustainability, yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add, and I'd actually like to build upon what you just said, Maurice. The European Union has recently more and more made sure that the different programs they're funding are long-term. And we mentioned the awareness issue. I mean, if you do a very short project or activity, the awareness might not even, go far enough that the people would be actually aware about the activity ongoing. And I think that the thing here to mention is that it's not a matter of how many different activities you can do, but to make sure that the things you do are long-term and that you build upon what's already been done and you don't just start like recreating the wheel every time. So I think on the EU level, we're trying our best and more on this.
I just had a super quick thing, something that you mentioned, Eric, before about like the awareness and reaching what I would call the last mile often, that it's very difficult. And I think we take it a little bit for granted because we work in this environment, but there is also another dimension that is key for sustainability, which is the partnership aspect. I'm mentioning this specifically because we've been collaborating throughout the year, and I think it will be launched more officially at the beginning of next year with CISA, the US Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency. It's very interesting because whilst mandated, if I'm not mistaken, with national security basically, but they started also in dealing with critical infrastructure, so big stuff, let's say. They also started looking into high-risk communities. And one of the challenges that they were facing were like, we would like to, again, raise the bar, but one of the problems that we have, how we reach that last mile, basically, and that people like you were saying, I mean, we work with people that completely ignore even what phishing is. And it was interesting because instead of like recreating the wheel, instead of like starting a whole new initiative, said, well, let's call the people that might already be working on this, asking to provide the best expertise they can according to the role that they have and according to the expertise. So, I mean, basically they put together the CyberPeace Institute, there are other civil society organizations, there are private sector companies, there are other public institutions that are part of these initiatives. And the idea is really to best leverage the expertise, the knowledge, what is already out there with the specific target in mind, but to make it sustainable over time. And it's something that honestly, from the CyberPeace Institute alone, we could never do that. So that's also how you make it sustainable over time. Questions?
And anyway, this is just hopefully the beginning of a conversation. So as this discussion in this panel comes to an end, I invite all of you, first of all, to engage our brilliant panelists who will be around for the rest of the evening and tomorrow, now ask your question, but also to continue to think collectively how we scale up these initiatives, how we make them more sustainable, more inclusive. As Celia was saying, how not to duplicate and reinvent the wheel, but use what already exists and partner and collaborate. So I think we're out of time. So unless you have any final thoughts that you want to share, again, I think I can invite everybody to ask you questions afterwards so we can keep the end. I also wanted to big shout out to our interpreter, because I keep hearing people talking in the back and I'm like, who's talking in the back? But thank you for sticking with us all day. We couldn't have done this with the incredible support of our interpreters in all of the sessions. So if you hear people talking in the back, it's actually the amazing team of interpreter here in Ghana. I want to thank our brilliant panelists. Thank you for the audience for staying. I know it's a long day. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow and later this afternoon for the reception. Thank you.